So you know it's not a crime to be fascinated by all things criminal. And if you do like delving into the underworld, why not join us for a special live show on March 27th at the Cork Opera House. We'll be talking about the making of a cartel and all the wild and crazy stories that happened along the way. So why not join us for this special live show? Tickets from corkpodcastfestival.ie. Okay, we're going to talk about a case where somebody's criminal past has come up to bite them. And it's about a guy called Darragh Quinlivan who pleaded guilty in relation to his role in the murder of a guy called Noel Campion many years ago during the sort of the feud in Limerick. Quinn-Leven was originally wanted for murder, but he's pleaded guilty on two lesser charges: facilitating an organised crime group and possession of a weapon.
Yeah.
And he's got 16 years.
He's got 16 years.
But he's had an interesting sort of past few decades, because he's been kind of on the run, even though he wasn't initially. He left the country shortly after the murder, but not when he was at that point wanted.
Well, he's 42 years old now.
Yeah.
This murder happened 19 years ago.
Right.
So, you know, and he's after getting a 16-year sentence of 1 year reduced. So, in theory, you know, he'd be out.
He'd be out now, yeah.
If he'd been convicted at the time. But what happened with Darragh Quinlivan was that while he was a suspect straight away, he was a member of the Dundon McCarthy gang, and he was certainly well known to guards and had a number of convictions. But he basically left the country before any proceedings could be brought, ended up in the US for a period of time, ultimately ended up in the UK. Sort of went and lived a relatively normal life at times, though he obviously wasn't perfect, as we'll hear.
Yeah.
But ultimately, a kind of a cold case review effectively was brought into the case, and he's ultimately been charged and convicted all of these years later.
So Quinn-Leven was one of the members of the McCarthy-Dundon mob. He was on that side of things.
He was on that side of things. He was, you know, while not in the leadership role, he was certainly a very much an associate. And it's described in court how the murder of Noel Campion was ordered from the very top of the McCarthy-Dundon gang.
Right.
Now...
it was really probably the murder of Noel Campion. There's three brothers in the Campion family. There was William, there was Noel, and there was Gary. We're going to talk about the other two brothers as well. But, you know, you could nearly say that Noel Campion was murdered because perhaps the McCarthy-Dundon gang couldn't get at his brother Gary.
Yes. So, I mean, while Noel had convictions and he had served a prison sentence for armed robbery, I think, and had a number of other criminal convictions, but he was still regarded as, while regarded as a criminal figure, it was his brother Gary was one of the more feared men in the city.
William, I mean, he was certainly, Noel was the lesser. Terrifying of the three Campion brothers.
Yes, and he was even at the time, he was regarded as a bit of a soft target. And you heard from Noel Campion's family in court, who sort of gave great testimony to him. But Gary Campion, his brother, I mean, I think you'd struggle to find anybody to give good testimony about Gary. I mean, Gary was a very, very feared figure. He was a hitman for hire, I suppose, in that he worked with both sides of the feud. He wasn't...
In such a small place.
I mean, he ultimately wasn't allied with any one of them. He was a total and utter loose cannon of the type that we've talked about, the sort of Robbie Lawler, Rue Redmond, that sort of type of very violent and erratic criminal. You know, his picture always stood out, big monobrow. I don't know if you remember those images of him. But ultimately, he was involved in the murder of a guy called Fat Frankie Ryan, who was, again, a McCarthy-Dundon figure. Gary Campion would have believed to have killed him, and that probably led to Noel's death, ultimately being ordered by the McCarthy-Dundons.
So Quinn-Leven, by the way, was seen, was he not, celebrating with some of the McCarthy-Dundons in the aftermath of Noel's death. He was killed while he was on a motorbike. He was on his way to the district court where he was facing a charge in relation to a traffic offence, and he had stopped at lights, I think he was with his brother-in-law or his then brother-in-law when he was shot.
Yeah.
Later that evening or thereabouts, Quinn-Leven was seen drinking and celebrating with members of the McCarthy-Dundon group. He then went to get a passport and went to the US. However, he managed that. Probably wouldn't be something he'd be able to do too easily now.
No.
But he did that, and he lived there for some years, and then he went back to Manchester. And really, he wasn't coming back, was he?
He wasn't coming back. But no, and he'd lived in Tacoma in Washington State for, I think it was, worked in a family business for about 6 months. A relative he had over there. But it's actually that time that has come back to haunt him. Because he was involved in a couple of drunken incidents. One in particular when the police were called out to deal with him being drunk and disorderly. And he told them he was, you know why I'm here? He told the police officers, I killed a man in Ireland. And he told them he shot him in the back of the head, execution style, because he had killed a friend of his. And of course, Quinn-Leven had been, I think the evidence was heard that he had visited Fat Frankie Ryan's
Did they think he was just making that up, the police officers? Can you imagine saying that to the ICE guys?
I don't know. I don't know. But and it actually has echoes of the Aaron Brady case as well, where that similar sort of evidence was given, though it wasn't a policeman involved. But ultimately, he was deported out of the US back to Ireland in 2008. And at that point, even these comments were brought up, but he just said it was rubbish and drunken talk. So he then seems to have ended up in the UK. And, while I don't think he lived a blameless life, he certainly seems to have ultimately ended up becoming a working man, a family man, raising kids. But it's all... Say it again.
Working on what?
It doesn't actually. I'm not exactly sure, but he hadn't. He'd been living in Manchester. He hadn't been involved in violent crime.
He didn't go to the detention police anyway.
No, not particularly.
Yeah. So now I'll tell you about the Campions. So there was the three brothers. There was Noel, William, and Gary. Now William has served 25 years behind bars for a really brutal murder of an elderly man that people may remember. His name was like Paddy Skian.
Yeah.
And he was a bachelor and he was living in County Clare.
Yeah.
And did he have a shop, or he certainly had some sort of a business? Did he have a kind of an old style haberdashery or something like that?
Yeah.
And it would have been a business that he might have perhaps had a little bit of money on the premises, cash. I think the belief was that he was one of these elderly gentlemen who kept his money, probably didn't trust a bank, and kept his money under the the mattresses kind of way that some people can do. So William Campion and others came into his home and they terrorised him. They beat him black and blue and they demanded to know where the money was. And I think he wouldn't give up. If there was any money, he wasn't telling them where it was. So they essentially ended up beating him, round the legs and body. They strung him up upside down by the ankles and hung him from the banisters. And they left him alive.
Yeah.
But by the time he was discovered, he was found, he was like, it was horrific.
It was horrific.
Absolutely horrific. I think there had been a spate of kind of really violent crime against elderly people in rural Ireland. And it was around that time those fears were very alive for people.
And there certainly was a time, particularly when there was a lot of cash being held by people in those circumstances, and they really were terrorised. I mean, it was a genuinely shocking crime, and of course, Willie Campion is just about to get out now. I mean, he's in an open prison, and he's been, getting some sort of release, I believe, but he remains in prison.
And he would be what, in his 50s?
I suppose he would be, yeah.
Because Noel Campion was 35 when he was shot.
Yes.
And he had just been released from prison himself, from serving some sentence. The brother, I think Gary was the youngest of the brothers.
Yes.
He's nowhere near release date.
No, I mean, Gary Campion, I think, is I think he's the only person to be serving 2 life sentences for 2 unconnected gangland murders. I mean, both of them particularly horrific crimes, but one of them really would have been one of those sort of gangland murders that really caused a shock, because an innocent bouncer, a guy called Brian Fitzgerald, was brutally killed on the orders of the Dundon McCarthy gang at that point.
And that was in 2002.
2002. And his crime, in their eyes, was that he wouldn't let them sell drugs in the pub, really.
Yeah.
And, you know, they obviously had, they would have formed for this, that they would do the same
Yeah.
to, at a later point, to Roy Collins as well, who
Yeah.
was another innocent person who just tried to keep them out of his establishment. So Brian Fitzgerald's Gary Campion was hired to kill that murder. Again, he wasn't a member of the Dundon McCarthy gang, but he took money to
To
kill
do
a
it.
man.
And there was another hired killer who ended up turning state witness, a guy called James Cahill. This was a really bizarre kind of chapter in that whole
Yes.
Limerick feud. He confessed to the murder and he gave the evidence of how Campion had driven him to and from the murder scene on a motorbike. And Campion then went on to get a second life sentence in 2009 for the murder of Frankie Ryan, which had happened in 2007. And he shot Ryan, who was his friend.
Yeah.
He got into the car. He sat behind him in a car.
Yeah, Fat Frankie Ryan would have been, you know, very heavily connected within the Dundon McCarthy gang, particularly in that kind of Moyross area, maybe even more so than in the Ballinacurra Western side. And yeah, he was shot in his car in front of a witness, and Gary Campion would ultimately be convicted of that. Now, Gary Campion has been in prison.
He's still suspected of involvement in two other murders, and one of them is the murder of the car dealer Sean Poland in 2002. He was killed during a robbery at his home on New Year's Eve, and the other is a murder linked to the Keane Colopy gang associate, a guy called Robert Fitzgerald. He was 23. Do you remember that?
I do.
In Moyross in May of 2003. I was going to say a lot of these names feel like they're forgotten. They're ancient history, don't they? And really, that was only 20 years ago.
That was only 20 years ago. And I mean, Gary Campion was, you know, at the centre of, he was an absolute rarity in that he carried out murders for both sides, a genuinely psychopathic sort of guy. He actually nearly died in prison, I think, in 2017.
Yeah.
He suffered a drug overdose.
And in 2004, and he was serving time at the time for an assault, he threatened a prison officer. And he said to the prison officer that I've shot people in this town for €10,000 and I'd have no difficulty spending €20,000 to have you blown away. If it's the last thing I do, I'll get you and your family. Terrifying.
Yeah.
Going into work for a day and somebody like Gary Campion saying that to you and threatening you like that. He was jailed for 2 years for the death threat. And Frankie Ryan was shot 3 days after he was released in that prison sentence.
Yeah, I mean, very, very... If you remember back at the time, I mean, the shootings in Limerick just seemed to happen one after another. And there was people, certainly like Noel Campion, while not an angel, he was effectively being targeted because of his surname. And that wasn't uncommon in Limerick at the time. I mean, merely being a relative of somebody was enough to put you in the firing line, literally.
Yeah. So anyway, Quinn-Leven, eventually his past catches up with him. And he is beginning that sentence, which is long. I mean, 15 years, even with a bit of remission, you'll probably serve 12.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. But I mean, he was initially charged with murder. And it's part of an overall trend that we're seeing, because even in his summation, the judge describes Quinn-Leven as, part of a plan to kill a man in cold blood. And he effectively describes Quinn-Leven as the gunman, says he ambushed this person and shot him virtually at point blank range. However, ultimately, he's not been convicted of murder. He has pled guilty to these lesser charges. One of them, which is possession of a firearm with intent to endanger life, but probably more kind of interestingly is the gangland charge. So again, we're seeing how, while the state investigate people for murder, they are also using these gangland laws to effectively get prosecutions where it's being offered to this person, Darragh Quinlivan. He's being saying, well, you can accept this plea and we'll accept it, and it's a lesser charge and you're not going to be in prison for the rest of your life, though you're getting a really, really long sentence. And it is part of an overall trend. You're talking about 20 years ago. Some of those murders are very different in different times. I mean, the idea that a murder would be carried out in the centre of a city in broad daylight, it's not happening at the moment because because of advances on CCTV and all of this, will make them a lot easier to find. But also you're seeing in modern Ireland, these gangland charges will be put to somebody, and there is a belief by the state that they can be proven, and people are pleading guilty to them.
So Noel Campion's daughter, I think it was 11 maybe when he was killed. What did she have to say in a victim impact statement?
Noel Campion's daughter, Lindsay, was just 11, and she told Quinn-Leven directly, "You murdered my father and you carried on with your life as if nothing had happened. You continued as if taking a life meant nothing." And his wife, Maureen, said that the death of her husband had changed everything. Noel did not deserve this brutal and premeditated murder inflicted on him, she said. And Judge McDermott described the murder as a directed killing and said that Quinn-Leven was the gunman that shot Campion at point-blank range and tried to kill the guy driving the bike.
Yeah, as well.
Yeah, Spider Scanlon was his name. So there's obviously a grieving family, and I do think that, Noel Campion, while, as I said, had been involved in various criminality, really it's the lifelong impact of this murder is shocking. And not the funny thing, but Darragh Quinlivan, if he had been caught at the time, he'd be coming out now. He'd be 40. What is he?
42.
42.
Is he?
Yeah.
He's young, isn't he?
He's young, but he would be finished the sentence now if he'd been convicted as a 24-year-old. And they said he is.
But he has really had the time to spend with his own growing children, hasn't he?
That's true. That is also true.
So, anyway, look, these crimes really with modern policing and technologies, etc., are still. Not everybody's got away with it.
No, and less people are going to, and that that is partly why the gangland murder rate is going down.
For sure. Okay, Niall, thanks. If you're a crimeworld.com subscriber, you've probably already binged on our latest exclusive podcast series, The Regency 10 Years On, from the hit that changed gangland forever. This 6-part anniversary special revisits that fateful day when David Byrne was shot dead at the Northside Hotel, igniting a bloody feud between the Kinahan and Hutch gangs, one of the deadliest rivalries in Irish history. Here's a taste of the new series, exclusive to crimeworld.com subscribers. So that Friday was one of those really quiet days. I mean, we all knew that Daniel Kinahan was in Dublin for the Clash of the Clans boxing weigh in. At least we knew he was due into Dublin the next day. That Clash of the Clans bout match had been heavily advertised. But the day itself there was just little going on.
So there was very little happening that day. It's February. It's kind of a quiet enough time for news in general. And Alan Cherry and Ernie Leslie were on the road. They were at another story actually in Finglas.
What was that? Do you remember?
Well, it was one of these classic sort of district court stories where a guy I think some teenagers had thrown stones at his car and he got out and slapped the teenager. Always great kind of human stories because some people feel sorry for the teenagers and some people don't. And so Alan had been out there, but the guy had moved on. He called out to his house to see if he wanted to talk. He'd moved on, he wasn't there. And we discussed going to the Regency earlier. And I said, look, just go along and see what happens. Divert there. We obviously weren't expecting anything. And obviously that point of Alan being there would be the subject of conspiracy, but we'll get into that at a later point.
For sure. So it was a case really that day of, one thing hadn't worked out, so go to the next. But also there was definitely a general sense of if we could be there, just in case.
Yes, and as you said, to see who was standing beside the Kinahans and who wasn't from that bigger organised crime group. So Alan and Ernie went out. I got a call. I think you got a call almost simultaneously, but I got a call from Alan. I'd spoken to him earlier on the day saying, see what happens. And he phoned me up and said, there's after being a shooting and I think we've got a picture. And I actually went, yeah, very funny. But of course, he stopped me and said, no, I'm serious. We're after, there's some guys come out with a gun, there's shots fired and there's total and utter chaos. And, our first thought is, get yourself safe. I have to admit, my second thought was, I hope they did get good pictures. But, you're still thinking they have to get safe. I mean, I know you probably got a similar call because Ernie and Alan obviously were in the same Jeep.
And of course, Ernie's the guy taking the photographs,
Yes.
so he's on the phone to me. So I actually had gone for a pizza for lunch and I had come back over to the office and the phone rings and it was Ernie. And I answered and he was panicked on the other end of the phone. This was real high octane stuff. And he's still trying to take photos. He's trying to tell me what's happened. He's told me he thinks he's got a good one of one of the shooters as they were running from the scene. He was trying to call up the photograph on the back of his camera.
Yeah.
Because it would have taken him a while to get it onto a screen, but he'd also sent it into the office.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So he was kind of in the middle of doing a number of things. And as I was on the phone to him from memory, the photograph came into the office and we put it up on the big screen. And it was clear to see that this wasn't just one of the shooters as he suspected, but it was two. One of them was dressed as a woman.
Which is, of course, there was also this confusing story about guards coming in with weapons, and obviously we know now that they weren't ERU guys, they were guys dressed as them. But Alan was telling me this, there was talk of these guards, and then obviously there was, the crowd fleeing from the scene. So it was all confusing. But as you said, Ernie had taken a picture of the back of his camera. People will know what the photographer's cameras look like, and they have a little digital screen. You don't see it in great detail, but we knew this is a once-in-a-lifetime photograph has been gotten.
Yeah, as soon as it came in. And of course, look, the newsrooms aren't as busy as they used to be. They used to be very busy, buzzy places with phones ringing everywhere. And it felt like a proper newsroom that day. I remember everybody's phone was going. People were hearing little bits about it. The news was starting to break about it. And of course, we were there sitting in the office with this photo. There's that sort of news sense in you that you want to run this.
Yeah.
And at the time, we weren't putting stuff up online. This would have been held for the paper on the Sunday, and this is a Friday afternoon. We had something really special here. But we also, I think, knew the guards were going to be desperate for that picture because they were two gunmen running from a scene of a crime. So it was a very compromised situation, and there was a bit of arguments going on, and there was voices were raised.
Totally. I mean, because it is complex. I mean, normally the journalism likes to keep itself separate from the Gardaí investigations. So Garda investigations go on and journalism reports on them. But obviously then you're put in this compromising position because you have guys running out visibly with handguns in their hands. And, they're obviously then disappeared into the ether. And you have to have a discussion about what is your civic responsibility in terms of, do you help the guards? You don't want these armed gunmen to run down the street and kill another few people. So it was a complex one, and people were aware straight away that the guards are going to want these pictures and want to use it for their purposes. And we also have our purposes, which is to tell what happened and to report on the news. So there was a conflict straight away.
From my memory, as the afternoon went on and I was talking to contacts and to other people who were involved in crime journalism, etc., it became apparent that there were no guards at the weigh-in. That in actual fact, the guards didn't seem to be there at all. They were called literally by the hotel and had arrived in response to what had already gone on. Of course, David Byrne had been shot dead in the reception of the hotel. We were getting photographs in later in the day, which showed a very shocked-looking Liam Byrne standing outside the hotel, his hands in his pockets, standing beside his cousin Liam Rowe, another significant cartel member. There was no sign of Daniel Kinahan. I was getting calls from people who were telling me that these professional killers had been flown into the country and had already been flown out. There was rumours, there was spin, and also there was the general, I suppose, conversations in regards to, oh my God, what is going to happen next? I mean, all anyone knew for sure was something was going to happen. David Byrne was a very, very senior lieutenant. He was also from criminal royalty, from the Byrne family. His brother-in-law is Thomas Bomber Kavanagh. You know, his brother is Liam Byrne, and he's very much at the heart of the Kinahan cartel. We knew from the beginning that this attack had occurred as part of the rivalry between the Kinahan and Hutch factions of what was once the one organisation. And I think everybody was really trying to predict what this might lead to, but nobody could have guessed.
Nobody could have guessed. And of course, those rumours straight away went around. It was straight away focused on the Hutch gang. But at this time, if you remember, while there had been other incidents, for example, an attempted hit on Jerry Hutch in Lanzarote, it wasn't, those incidents weren't always public. People were straight away thinking this isn't the type of normal organised crime operation. They were looking at the weapons, saying, is there a paramilitary organisation involved here? Nobody knew fully. And of course, what people did fear straight away was, no matter what, people knew how big and how powerful the Kinahans had become, and the likelihood of them not striking back was inevitable. That blood was going to flow.
That bit absolutely 100%. But at that very early stage, I recall contacts of mine suggesting that the Hutches were an army. Did they have the backing of the dissidents? Was this going to, were they going to be very heavily armed because of that? They had contacts in the north. It was like as if people were trying to size up how two Premiership teams were going to play against one another. That's what it felt like. You've been listening to an extract from The Regency, 10 years on from the hit that changed gangland forever. Visit crimeworld.com and subscribe to hear the full series now. And you'll also get exclusive access to our other podcast deep dives on the Dapper Don, Christy Kinahan, Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, and more.